Does anyone want to guess from the thumbnail and from my t-shirt what tag I'm going to be doing today? It's the Inside Out tag, in case you didn't know. I was tagged to do this by Melanie Reeds. I will leave her channel down below. She's really, really cute, so definitely check her out. Inside Out tag basically is obviously based on the Disney Pixar film, and basically you just pick 5 books, one of each makes you feel each of the 5 emotions. So I had to wear this shirt to do this tag. Obviously, this is one of my favourite shirts ever. It's obviously an Inside Out and Pokemon crossover, so obviously it's incredibly appropriate for this video. So I'm just going to get right on into it, and I'm going to start with the book that brings me joy, and that is Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. I know you're probably sick of this series already on my channel, but this is my favourite Harry Potter book and it brings me nothing but joy every single time I read it. It's the only Harry Potter book where nobody dies, and it's the only Harry Potter book without Voldemort in it. Now, of course, it's not considered a typically happy or uplifting book, but it's a book that brings me so much hope and so much joy, and I've said before that it's the turning point in the series. It's the point where I think Harry Potter becomes an adult, well, a more adult series than the first 2 books. So yeah, every time I reread this, I'm just full of happiness. So therefore it was an obvious choice for joy for me. The next book I have is Sadness. This is a book that made me cry absolute bucket loads. I think it was the first book I ever read where I cried actual tears over, and that is My Sister Lives on the Mantelpiece by Annabelle Pitcher. This is a bordering on middle grade young adult book, I would say, about a boy who has twin sisters, 2 older twin sisters, and one of them is dead, and she's dead at the beginning of the book, and they keep her ashes in a little urn on the mantelpiece. And obviously there's all the family tragedy and drama surrounding that, but the part that made me cry in this book wasn't really to do with that. It's to do with a very, very tragic event that happens right at the end of the book, and I'm not going to say it for fear of spoiling it for anyone that wants to read it and hasn't, but it's terrible. I cried. I remember when I read this, it was quite a few years ago now, but the memory is still ingrained in me, and I don't think it'll ever go away. But I was laying in bed and I finished this book, and I felt these tears coming down my face, and I was like, that's probably not the part I should really be crying at, but I was, and it just gets you right there. It really, really does. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, I thoroughly recommend it, because it's also incredibly well written and all the rest of it. So yeah, that is that. The next book I have is representing fear. And I had a lot to choose from for this, because I do read a lot of horror. I read a lot of good horror. And the one I've gone for is the book that I think has probably scared me the most out of all of them, and that is Pet Sematary by Stephen King. I read a lot of Stephen King books, but this is definitely the one that I think affected me the most. It's also the one that Stephen King says scared him the most when he was writing it. Apparently when he wrote it, he put the manuscript in a drawer for months, maybe it might even have been years actually. He just put it away because he was so horrified by what he'd written. If that doesn't make you want to pick this book up and you like horror, I don't know what else is going to. If the writer is that scared by what he has written, then yeah, definitely. There's also a really low budget 80s film of this, which I haven't seen because I'm scared that it's gonna ruin this for me, because this is such a good book, and it's so good if you want to just freak yourself out for a little bit. But yeah, if you like horror, especially if you like Stephen King and you haven't read this one yet, definitely recommend it, because it's definitely the scariest one that I've ever read. So yeah, that is definitely fear. The next one I have is Anger, represented by the awesome Charmander right here. This book just fills me with a lot of emotions, but I think probably Anger was one of the strongest ones that I got when I read it, and it is Only Ever Yours by Louise O'Neill. And the reason this makes me so angry is because it just reminds me of all of the injustice and inequality in the world, particularly between the genders and between how women are supposed to be seen by society. I've talked about this book before. It was in my favourite books of last year, so I think probably most of you know the premise. It's about a world where girls are not born, they are made in things called schools, and they are trained to be these perfect women and to be these amazing, beautiful, perfect wives for these young, rich, wealthy men. And it's so real, and that's what Louise O'Neill does in her writing. She takes real life issues and she puts them into fiction, but she makes it kind of so it's not fiction. You can definitely see that this is so relevant to the real world. And yeah, so it filled me with a lot of things. It filled me with a lot of sadness as well, but mostly anger and just outrage, I would say, because it just made me realise how terrible and how unequal the world is. So yeah, that is that. And the last book I have to show you is Disgust, which, okay, so this book, I read it because it's a cult classic, and most people have read it. Even more people have seen the film, I think. And it is American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. I read this early last year, and it's so horrible. I can't even explain. I only gave it 3 out of 5 stars because I knew I would never be able to read it again. I would never be able to live through the horrible graphic descriptions of brutal murders in this book. And I read a lot of horror. I watch a lot of TV shows where there is a lot of violence. But this book, I cannot watch the film. I know I can never ever watch the film now because it's just going to be a visual version of this, and it's going to be, I think, probably even worse than what my mind imagined it to be in this book. So it disturbed me so much, and it filled me with disgust. It really, really did. And as I said, I really like books with murders and violence and a lot of nasty stuff in it, but this was too much for me. I cannot even, no. So yeah, that is that. I don't even want to talk about it anymore. It was horrible. It was really, really horrible. And anyway, that is it for the Inside Out tag. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to do this tag, then go ahead and do it. I'm not going to tag anyone in particular, so if you want to do it, then thoroughly recommend it if you think you have a book for each of these emotions. As usual, I will leave all of my social media down below, and I will see you very soon. Bye bye.